Hi everybody. My name is Severin Guillard. I'm a postdoc on the FaceSpace research project at the University of the West of Scotland, and I'm in charge of chairing this session. As Andrew has said, this is a session dedicated to a relation between festival, city, as urban space, and usually public space. And we have 5 presentation this morning. As Andrew said previously, each presentation is 10 minutes. So I'll be in charge of making sure that it works well with the timing. So I'll probably write in the chat privately to each presenters if there are like a couple of minutes remaining. So check your chat during the presentations. If you have any visual material, feel free to share it through the screen during the presentation. And for all the other attendees, you can feel free to ask questions during the presentations through the chat function, or even to say that if you have a question, so we can come to you after the presentations. Okay, so I'm not going to speak longer. I'm going to introduce the first speakers, who are Ilaria Papalipore and Adam Eldridge from the University of Westminster, and they are going to present something on festival space in the contemporary city through the example of Christmas in London.
Okay, thank you, Severin, and thank you, everyone. It's actually just me today. Adam could not make it, but we did write the paper together. So it's by both of us, even though I'm presenting on behalf of both. And can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, I'm going then to share my screen because I do have a just presentation made of images just to put you in the Christmas mood, because this paper is about Christmas, and I don't know about you, but here in Milan it's not very Christmassy at all, the weather, so I think I need to have my presentation. So I'm just going to try to find it. Here we are. Okay. Am I sharing the right thing? Can you see a PowerPoint presentation? Because I can't see it now. Can you see it now?
It's coming. Don't worry. Just be patient. It just takes a second for it to come. We can see.
Okay. Yeah, it is coming.
Yes, I have it.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Sorry for the technical glitch. So this is a paper that, as I said, I wrote with my colleague Adam Eldridge. We're both from the University of Westminster. Adam is a sociologist who specializes in themed spaces and in the nighttime economy. And my work is mainly on urban tourism, especially tourism in London, and cultural events. And this research is a development of a book chapter that we wrote in a book called Destination London, which is freely downloadable from the internet. So I will send you the link later. So if you're interested, you can actually download the whole book for free. And the book chapter that started this idea for this research was about Christmas events in London. And this paper that I'm presenting here is essentially a development of the book chapter and an idea for some empirical research that we want to do in the coming months, especially during the Christmas period. So in the previous work we've done on Christmas events and Christmas festivals, we looked at the ways in which Christmas themed events and spaces in London expand, extend, and intensify tourism and the tourist experience. What we want to discuss today here is how we want to develop this into a more empirical type of research, and the kind of themes that we want to explore, which are around the inclusivity of Christmas and winter events, and also how these themes, spaces, and events are experienced by different space users, including especially people from a varied range of religious, ethnic, age, and sexual backgrounds. So these are the kind of questions that we want to raise and things around the articulation of public space as well, the commercial interests and commercial aspects of these events, and also the night, since Adam is especially interested in the night and myself as well, and tourism. So kind of bringing together my interests and Adam's interests as well. So much of the academic discussion around Christmas events is very much around the tension between the religious meaning of Christmas and the secular, hedonistic, more commercial aspects of it. So one of the key criticisms around Christmas events and everything related to Christmas is the way in which Christmas values, for example, generosity, gift giving, conviviality, are leveraged by commercial businesses and are essentially commodified. So some academics before us have referred to Christmas, and I'm quoting Hancock and Wren here, as a global festival of production and consumption, or again quoting Duchamp, the greatest holiday of the consumer culture. So a lot of criticism around the consumerism related to Christmas. But what we're really interested in here, apart from that discussion, is the inclusivity of those spaces. So spaces such as winter markets, winter Christmas markets, like a winter wonderland in London, for example. These spaces that are not necessarily racially exclusive, and we know the fact that many of these spaces are not marketed as Christmas, but they're marketed as winter markets. So they want to kind of get away from the religious connotation, but they're still quite racially coded in the sense that there is a very strong symbolism associated to them. And this symbolism is very much linked to the stereotype of all things Northern European, so kind of Scandinavian or Bavarian, German stereotypes. So there is a racially coded symbolism around these spaces. So this is again potentially a criticism of the inclusivity of those spaces, but on the other hand also we note that there is an expansion of free and accessible events that happens in London and in other cities around Christmas. And this is something that we want to stress in our research as well. So events and festivals and spaces such as Christmas illuminations, switch on events, winter wonderland and all the other Christmas markets, window displays, fireworks, all the live entertainment that happens at Christmas, many of these things are all free to the public. So there is that element that needs to be considered as well. So in the paper, we want to stress how these Christmas spaces could potentially provide a family-friendly entertainment that could contribute to extend the urban leisure experience in many ways. So spatially, for example, public parks that remain open during the coldest months and that are accessible during months in which normally they would be closed or not very much used, but also temporarily, so into the night. Again, because the cold months are so dark and cold at night, these very cheerful and light events provide an entertainment during the night that is different from the usual drinking and clubbing and dining out that would be normally the key type of leisure activity that people do in the winter months in the night, but also potentially for a wider range of audiences, from the traditional nighttime leisure activities audiences and night. So parks that otherwise would be possibly closed, or areas that would be not necessarily oriented towards leisure and entertainment, become accessible, open, and more exciting thanks to those Christmas events. So this is something that we are considering in this research as well. We're also interested in lights and the role of lights. So we're thinking about light illuminations that happen on shopping streets, especially switch on events, which are those events in which the lights are switched on. And normally you can see here in the pictures that I'm showing, there is live entertainment that is organized on the occasion of the switching on. And light night festivals, which are not strictly Christmas events, but they're often used to extend the Christmas season. For example, in London, Lumiere was a very large light night event that happened twice in January 2016 and 2018, attracting more than 1 million visitors each time, and was happening all over the streets of London, public spaces. It was completely free and was a big success. And probably many of you are aware of all the light night events that happen all across Europe and outside of Europe as well. So we're interested in those events as well because often they are linked to the objective of making city centers at night more inclusive and offer a more open and fluid alternative to mass drinking. So we're interested in this link between inclusivity and those events as well. But probably the most interesting aspect for us is those themed spaces such as Winter Wonderland, Christmas markets, and also Christmas ice rinks and so on, which are created specifically around the theme of Christmas. So that link between those spaces and that family-friendly entertainment opportunity is especially interested for us, as I said before, especially because they offer an alternative to drinking during the night hours. And at Christmas and around Christmas, so from November to January, there are so many hours of darkness that the night actually extends for a much longer period than in other times of the year. So it's especially important. However, the use of public space for those events is a contentious issue that we want to address. Places like Winter Wonderland, which is the major Christmas market that happens in London, but also other ones that you see in the pictures, like the one on South Bank, for example. Many of those spaces take up public space. So Winter Wonderland happens in Hyde Park, so it actually happens in a Royal Public Park. Whereas the other markets that you see in the pictures, for example, the one in South Bank takes place also on a public space, which is the South Bank. So one of the issues here is how these public spaces are used. Winter Wonderland, for example, is very popular, so clearly has a wide appeal. It has attracted more than 40 million visitors since the first edition in 2007. But it still attracts controversy in the way in which it occupies, commercializes, and also potentially vulgarizes a public park, even though it is free to enter. But then you might have to pay for some of the rides and the activities inside. And then there are all the other concerns that I discussed before, linked to the symbolism attached to these theme spaces, which are very much linked to this stereotype of the Northern European image of Christmas. So just to conclude the last 30 seconds, the kind of questions that we're asking this research and the kind of empirical research that we want to do is around the inclusivity of those spaces, especially since that take place, as I said, often in private or public or semi-public spaces. So, you know, the kind of questions we want to ask are around who participates and how the experience differs from, you know, between different space users and different ethnicities, sex or age backgrounds or religious backgrounds, but also who leads these spaces, who manages and decides what stories get told but not told, what exclusions and inclusions occur, and so on. So the research we want to do is interviews with participants and non-participants from a variety of ethnic and religious backgrounds, and observations on site, which we hope to do from November onwards if we're allowed, because at the moment we're not allowed to do any empirical research. So that was just a brief outline of the research, and I would love to hear from you any suggestions for the research, any comments, and any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilaria. This was fascinating, and I think it's very reminiscent of some research that we do in the FaceSpace project as part of the FaceSpace project in Scotland. around also Christmas market and all the events happening in Edinburgh, where there is a huge controversy on that. So it's like a very reminiscent of what we do. Feel free to share the link of the book that you mentioned at some point after the question. We have a couple of minutes for questions. I think there have been some comments in the chat. So there is especially a question from David, who says, are there any concerted public opposition to the use of some of London's public space for winter festivals, and in particular, potential benefits or lack of local traders, resident communities?
Yeah. Actually, I think this is something that we should research in more depth once we start the empirical research, because when we did the background research, which was done all without doing empirical research, we just did a theoretical, it was more of a theoretical discussion really, which is contained in that book chapter. So I think we should look into it in more detail. I have not heard in London specifically about organized complaints about these events taking place in public spaces, but I'm not saying here that there is definitely not any, because I haven't researched this enough yet to find out, but it's definitely one aspect that we need to research.
Okay, there was also a question from Bernadette saying, what about opposition from other commercial actors, permanent retailers, trader? But I think you partly answer this.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard of any so far, but I think this is something that we need to research a bit more. I mean, in terms of some of the events, like switch-on events and lighting and so on, they're obviously organized often by the local businesses because they hope to draw people to the local area. So it's probably the opposite. And then again, places like South Bank, for example, it's lined up with restaurants. So in a way, it draws people to the area, I think, because it happens during the cold months where people maybe are less likely to normally have a walk along the river rather than, it's normally something that people do more in the summer months. I think probably I would say that the businesses benefit from the footfall that comes from those little markets. But it could be, if we had a budget to extend the research, I think it would definitely be a very interesting extension to not just look at the participants and non-participants to those events in terms of diversity, but an extension of the research could definitely be to look at the businesses as well and how they feel about those events. I think in our idea, we wanted to mainly focus on inclusivity, so participants and how diverse they are and how people from different backgrounds feel about those events. But I think if we had to do a bigger project, it would be interesting to also look at other things like how the locals feel and how the local businesses feel and so on.
Okay, there are also a lot of interesting comments on the chat about reference towards like papers, articles linked to what you have presented. We are trying to keep on time, so we're probably going to move on to the next presentation. Just a question: could you see my comments on the chat for the 1 minute left, 2 minutes left?
I couldn't, because I was presenting with the presentation on my screen. I couldn't actually.
Okay, so that's
so
a good.
It might be, I don't know, maybe you have to say something.
Okay,
I did have a timer, so I had an eye on my timer.
Yeah, I'll probably adopt Goran methodology then at some point. Showing how many. Okay, so we're going to move to the second presentation, which is from Anna de Jong and Chloe Stidman from the University of Glasgow and the Manchester Metropolitan University, and they're going to present something on the geographies of belonging in urban spaces of alcohol consumption through the case of a craft music festival. So I'll probably put the timing into the chat too, but if you can't see it, I'll probably say 3, 2, 1, and if it works for you.
Can you all see the slides okay and hear me okay?
Yeah.
I think we can.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Perfect. So yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Welcome to everyone. Thanks so much for having us today. I'm Anna de Jong, and then I'm going to pass over to Chloe later in the presentation, and we're going to be presenting some work that we've been doing over the last couple of years on craft beer events across Manchester. So more specifically today, we're going to take focus with how cultural events influence urban belonging. And to do this, we will explore how processes of inclusion and exclusion flow through and beyond Manchester's independent beer convention, more informally known as Indieman. So cultural geographers have identified the influence of cultural events in informing urban belonging, whilst also being cautious towards the politics associated with claims of diversity and inclusion. And yet what seldom features in such geographic accounts are the ways one-off events influence and are constructed by inclusions and exclusions beyond the temporal and spatial confines of events, as well as the way territorial processes can flow in and across online and offline spaces. With us today suggests that in attending to issues of diversity and inclusion within event contexts, we need to consider the ways through which belonging is embedded within and beyond the spatial and temporal confines of events. So to take this focus, we have been drawing on a territoriological approach, and we're definitely not the first to have drawn on such an approach within cultural geography or event studies to understand cultural events in urban space. But rather we hope to build on this previous work by focusing on how processes of inclusion and exclusion work beyond the static and fixed time and space of events. So to achieve this, we're engaging with the work of Brahenty and his territoriological approach, which considers the fluidity and processual dimensions of territorialisation to examine how things temporally and spatially assemble in ways that produce inclusions and exclusions. So for Brahenty, a territory is not an object, nor can it be reduced to the place in which it emerges, but it's rather an act or a practice that takes place through places. So following this approach, inclusions and exclusions are therefore processual and relational, opening and closing through their becoming, and constructing certain ordered social relations whereby particular relationships become perceived as dominant momentarily in ways that are based on previous relations as well as broader social structures. So utilising the territorial logical approach, as I said, we have been examining Indieman, Independent Beer Convention, which is an annual craft beer event that takes place in Manchester's Victoria Baths. And this venue, Victoria Baths, is really important to understand that the way the atmosphere is within the event is afforded through Victoria Baths' unique architectural heritage, as well as its spatial layout. So it's a 1906 Edwardian Grade 2 listed building, and on opening the venue was very much promoted as a community space and really became crucial to the local community as a public space, affording the opportunity for many of Manchester's inner city youth to learn how to swim over the years. However, it just became too expensive for Manchester City Council to run, so much so that they closed down the site in '93. In response to this closure and in response to the value of this site within the local community, a Buildings Preservation Trust was formed by local residents that aimed to re-establish the site as a swimming location for the local community. For now, however, to ensure economic sustainability, the building primarily relies on its position as a heritage visitor attraction, where it costs £7 per tour, and the revenue received from its extensive cultural event portfolio. Indieman within this has become an annual fixture at Victoria Baths, initially starting as just a one-day event in 2012 where it attracted 500 attendees, to becoming in 2019 an event that took place across 4 days with 6 sessions and 1,000 attendees at each of the sessions. So it has 6,000 attendees in total each year. It's very much positioned as an open-minded, inclusive and modern event, so much so that it's claimed that anyone of any experience can come and enjoy it. It's not meant to be or marketed as just something that's attached to a craft beer scene. So to understand how processes of territorialisation flow spatially and temporally through and beyond Indieman, Chloe and I have been using Keyhole Analytics software to collect over 4,000 online posts from across social media, utilising the hashtag IndieManBeerCon across a 1-month period at the 2019 event, 2 weeks before, during, and then again 2 weeks after. We've also conducted participant observation in 2018 and 2019, and I served as a volunteer at the 2018 event as well. So to speak to some of our thematic findings through this framework of territorialisation, I'll pass over to Chloe now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly take you through some of our key project findings around the territorialisation of craft beer, and more specifically, the boundary making processes taking place through the event, which result in feelings of belonging for some, whilst leading others to feeling like bodies out of place. And the first key theme in our data we're calling the assembling of territories, which relates to this idea that Anna spoke about before, whereby territorial processes taking place through the event flow beyond the time and the space of the event itself, since IndieMan forms part of a broader, porous craft beer network or territorial scene. So as you can see here, for example, even within the city of Manchester alone, IndieMan takes place in a broader fringe craft beer fringe network, whereby there's other craft beer events dotted across the city and taking place at the same time as the festival itself, as part of the IndieMan Beer City concept. And as one brewer alluded to online, for example, he referred to Manchester as having craft beer paved streets. And according to Briganti, a territorial scene is produced through the construction of what is, and therefore what is not, part of that territorial assemblage. And in the case of the craft beer scene, for example, we found that knowledge sharing, for example, about different beer brands, different brewers, different beer types, different brewing processes, is real crucial to constructing the territorial boundaries of the craft beer scene. Those with greater knowledge about these things, with greater levels of cultural capital, experience a much greater sense of belonging within the craft beer scene. And as you can see here, the beer list, which you can see in the middle, is found on the IndieMan app. And those with a lot of knowledge about craft beer often use this list in order to carefully plan their beers in advance, which can lead to territorialising behaviours upon arrival, whereby they'll often then strategically place themselves by the most sought after international brewers, spreading their belongings across chairs and tables to signify occupied space. We're now going to further unravel this idea of territorial exclusions within our second key theme. So as Anna mentioned before, although IndieMan is on the surface presented as being this really it's a largely male, white and middle class dominated event. And these territorial processes can be in motion before the event even begins, based on historical drinking discourses and past experiences. So as you can see in these field notes, territorial associations are often formed between men, masculinity and craft beer, which led to me questioning my own attendance, as you can see here, at the 2019 event. But there's also very much a class dimension to these territorial boundaries and processes. So because the event's becoming more popular each year, it's becoming increasingly difficult to get hold of tickets, especially for the most sought after Saturday sessions, constructed here as being the golden ticket. But the event is also becoming much more expensive year on year, whereby some beers at the 2019 event were estimated to cost up to £30 a pint, which is obviously pricing a lot of people out of attending altogether, or at least questioning return attendance. We also found that territorialising behaviours also take place within the time and space of the event itself. So as nicely captured in this image and quote, for example, territorial masculised behaviours often emerge within the festival space itself, which lead to the presence of females, although not uncommon, being seen as somewhat out of place at the festival. Women experience perceptions of exclusion. However, importantly, territorial boundaries are not static. They're always in a process of becoming, since territories are on the move. And sometimes this destabilisation of territories can be a more unintentional thing, as in the case of COVID-19, which has obviously had a massive destabilising effect on the craft beer scene, whereby everybody was temporarily excluded from the places of its consumption during lockdown. However, we also found instances of more intentional destabilisation of territorial boundaries. Most notably, we found that female-only craft beer groups used online spaces to organise a meet-up at the 2019 event, as you can see here. And through this meet-up, they were therefore able to create interstitial spaces or pockets of belonging to challenge the existing masculinised territorial orders. So to briefly wrap up then, our research seeks to uncover how cultural events such as craft beer festivals can influence broader processes of urban belonging, whereby territorial processes flow beyond the time and space of the event itself. And through showing the potential for territorial boundaries to become destabilised, we hope to therefore in turn show how things could be more inclusive and that there is a potential for sort of things to be otherwise. And that's it. Thank you.
Perfect. It's 10 minutes and 14 seconds, so that's perfect.
Thanks.
So yeah, again, there are a lot of interesting comments in the chat about the fact that you use especially hybridized digital research tools and practices, and David says that these techniques are going to be important in a post-COVID world. There is also another question from David saying, watching Monctopia recently drew attention to the role of craft beer venues and events as a feature of gentrifying processes, drawing desired young professionals to areas subject to regeneration. Exclusivity is the intention here, surely. So I don't know if you have any comments on that. We can't hear you, Anna. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I think this definitely feeds into this broader process of gentrification across the city of Manchester. Within our broader work, we've been looking at Manchester's cultural ambitious policy, which is all about how the utilisation of culture and attracting both visitors and also longer term residents to the area through a cultural events program such as craft beer events. And craft beer has also been integral to the gentrification of the northern quarter within Manchester as well. So I think that there's really interesting things around inclusivity here as well that can be connected to the craft beer scene that we couldn't get into today. But as a result of that focus on culture and a specific form of middle class culture through craft beer, it is leading to forms of exclusion across the city.
Yeah, so our research sort of focused off, we were sort of very interested in sort of the gender dimensions, but I think as our data unfolded and we started making sense of our data, we very much found that intersectionality is really important here. So it's not just about gendered exclusions, but we found there was sort of, as Anna just said, sort of class-based exclusions and things that are going on in the broader craft scene. It's not just necessarily unique to Indieman as an event, but sort of take place across the city of Manchester and also elsewhere across the world, I guess, or Europe.
Okay, there are also in the chat, so Andrew, who says that it's interesting to see the festivalization of everyday culture as well as the festivalization of space, as he's interested in the way festivals turn leisure into an event. And we also have a question from Katarzyna asking if you could elaborate on how Briganti's approach has informed your findings.
Do you want me to take that one, Chloe, or?
Yeah, if you want to start, and I can jump in if there's anything else.
Yeah, I think we were initially, when we started doing observation at the events before we'd collected the keynote data, we really found that this idea of territorialization spoke really clearly to the observations that we were seeing, particularly around how kind of all female groups kind of clustered together and how they kind of formed a sense of belonging, but within this very kind of masculine space, or maybe not masculine, but dominated by men craft beer consumers. However, we realised that this wasn't unique necessarily, obviously, to Manchester craft beer events in Manchester or Indieman, but it was very much a part of broader drinking cultures and the craft beer scene more broadly that was happening internationally. So we wanted to think about territorialisation, but in a way that wasn't kind of limited to the space, didn't limit our analysis to the space, which I think Briganti's framework does really well, because it is all about those kind of broader social and cultural processes and then how things become assembled momentarily within a particular time and space. So it allowed us to kind of do both of those things kind of simultaneously.
And I think the fact that he sort of has a very processual and dynamic view of territoriality, it was very important for informing this last sort of theme. Obviously I touched on the findings very briefly here, but it was kind of, we're talking a lot about exclusion, but it kind of gives a bit of hope that things can actually change over time. These territorial boundaries aren't sort of static or fixed or bounded, they're sort of porous, and they have the ability or capacity to be changed over time as well. He talks a lot about processual relations and these sorts of things. So that was also important for unpacking this sort of third theme I briefly touched on today, I think.
Connected to what Anna said, there is also a question from Bernadette Quinn, and this is probably going to be the last question because we have to make sure that it works well with time. Asking if there is anything particular to Manchester informing what's going on here, and yeah, if you can probably answer that.
I mean, we have been focusing on Manchester, but I think it is, yeah, an important kind of point to remember that this is part of something kind of much broader. I think there are elements that are unique in relation to the way that craft beer events are being facilitated through the structures of Manchester, but at the same time, there are kind of similar processes taking place in other craft beer events that we've kind of come across. You know, this is part of a broader network. Even the slide up here with the Crafty Beer Girls and Ladies That Beer, these are female drinking groups that go to a number of events across the UK and also internationally. So it's not just unique to Manchester.
Okay, thanks very much. So we are going to move to the third presentation of this morning session from Kevin Burns and Daisy Kearney, who are going to do a presentation called Come Enjoy the Craic, locating an Irish traditional music festival in Drogheda, and I forgot to say that they are from the Dundalk Institute of Technology.
Yeah, good morning. So a bit like Ilaria earlier, I'm going to speak on behalf of both Kevin and myself. Kevin is also present, and he'll be there for questions to help me out afterwards. To give a little bit of background, I'm primarily a geographer and ethnomusicologist. I'm actually an Irish traditional musician as well, as you'll see later in the presentation. And Kevin's research focuses in tourism, but primarily on the stakeholder experience. So to give a little bit of insight, Fleadh na hÉireann, which I'll refer to as the FLA hereafter, is a festival of Irish traditional music that began in 1951 and was organised by an organisation called Comhaltas Ceoltóirí Éireann. And it was an effort to promote Irish traditional music, song and dance that they believed was in danger of dying out. It's held in the town of Drogheda in Ireland on the East Coast for the first time in 2018. Prior to that, it was in Sligo and Ennis in 2014, 2015 in Sligo, 2016 and 17 in Ennis. And prior to that, you can see that it was primarily over on the West Coast. Some of the interesting things for us is that Drogheda isn't in an area renowned for Irish traditional music. I suppose studies and kind of even anecdotes would suggest that it's very much something on the West Coast. Possibly of more interest in this paper is that the FLA has a very significant economic impact on the host town or city and has grown substantially from early events to reported crowds of 600,000 and 750,000 people respectively for the 2 years that the event was held in Drogheda. And there's an estimated 50 million generated in the host region. Now, one of the challenges for any town hosting the FLA is to adapt the use of public spaces to facilitate both a large number of people and also music making on the streets and the involvement of participants in creating the festival itself. There are lots of activities at the FLA. For example, music workshops, song workshops, and competitions are usually held in schools. And there's also a temporary concert dome erected to host the largest competitions. The cost of the dome is significant, and it is used also for ticketed concerts during the week. And these feature headline artists, some of which move beyond the genre of Irish traditional music, but attract a wider audience, and the ticket sales help to defray the costs of that. Many Irish traditional music aficionados prefer to attend or participate in the free events, which is challenging for the budgeting of the festival. So we're going to focus on 3 main spaces at the Fleadh in Drogheda. You can see here on the screen some photographs of the gig rig in a place called Bolton Square. You can see in the centre there St. Peter's Church, which is on the main street of the town. And you can also see images from an area around Lawrence's Gate, a very iconic building in the town. These spaces created for very large crowds, but also demonstrate different uses of public space in the context of the Fleadh. And a critical reflection on the activities highlights the presence of local residents and their changing engagement with Irish traditional music. A critical aspect is recognising the importance of live music and its accessibility to different groups of people. Being granted the opportunity to host Fleadh Cheoil na hÉireann is a very competitive process, and it reflects kind of the increasing inter-urban competition for large-scale events such as the Fleadh. A committee was formed in Drogheda that included the local authority, and it bid for 5 successive years before being awarded the event for 2018. So it's a long-term process. The location of Drogheda between Dublin and Belfast is also important. And in the literature, there's some conflicting aspects about what type of a place Drogheda is. Drogheda is at once a small town with lots to offer, but also the biggest town in Ireland, a vibrant cosmopolitan town with 2 of the largest shopping centres in the country, nestled among countless artisan retailers. So at once we're talking about a town that aspires to be a city and also aspires to maintain a small town feel. It's also, in the context of tourism, part of Ireland's ancient East and a destination town with an emphasis on its built heritage. And we can see some aspects of that in the slides as I show you some photographs. It's interesting to note also that unlike some other festivals in different parts of the world, there were no new buildings for the Fleadh. So the existing spaces and how existing spaces were used is very important. As well as visitors to the town, the event received significant television coverage, including a live 3-hour broadcast on national media each night. So every effort was made to ensure that visitors to Drogheda and those viewing TV broadcasts from the event would be impressed by the cleanliness and attractiveness of the various spaces in the town. Paddy Donnelly, who was one of the local authority leaders on the committee, told us that there was a significant investment from the council's point of view in relation to the cleanup of Drogheda and the repainting of bridges, the power washing of some public buildings, and that this probably wouldn't have been undertaken, and certainly wouldn't have been undertaken in this short time frame were it not for the Fleadh. And this was all done to enhance the public space. So to look quickly at these public spaces, the first one is Bolton Square. And in the images here, you can see President Michael D. Higgins opening the Fleadh in 2018 to large audiences, and you can see some of the others. To put my role into perspective, I've included a photograph of myself here. I was a volunteer at the Fleadh, and I was located quite a lot of the time as MC on the gig rig. So I bring in very much an insider perspective of being involved. Kevin is on the other side of the fence, as it were. He's looking in from somebody who's not so involved in Irish traditional music and is looking with a different perspective. And hopefully that will help us balance each other as we kind of examine the event. The potential of Bolton Square, this location, as the location of events for the Fleadh, was identified in the 2013 Urban Design Framework for Drogheda. In the context of Drogheda as a town, it is a large public space in the centre of the town that is easily accessible from a number of points. Its role in the Fleadh is significant as it was a space that provided live music free of charge for very large numbers of people. The acts included a mix of local artists and community arts groups, as well as leading professional musicians. Again, Paddy Donnelly from the local authority noted that Bolton Square quickly became the preference for the gig rig, as it was referred to, because of its town centre location, and they constructed a Fleadh village type approach to make sure that people got around the town easily and everything was accessible. The challenges around it were the residents that lived in the houses surrounding the square and the traders that faced onto the site. So they engaged very early on with the residents in that, and Donnelly in his role as both an employee of the local authority and as secretary to the FLA committee, individually wrote to many of these. He remembers that there was some concern from the residents about the impact of the activities in Bolton Square, but they were reassured by the plan for managing activities and the benefits it would bring to the area. And for example, start and finish times were negotiated with that in mind. The businesses provided a little bit more of a challenge, but the council facilitated deliveries and worked to convince them that the benefits would outweigh the decline in business that they might result from the closure of through traffic because of the FLA. An important aspect in terms of programming this was that there was a balance of amateur community and professional artists who performed all without fees. Both the President of Ireland and the Taoiseach, or Prime Minister, came to the gig rig, with the President officially opening the event each year and the Taoiseach beginning a walkabout from Bolton Square. So as the site of both the official opening and closing of the festival and the presence of very, very large crowds, the FLA gig rig was a focal point for the event. Lawrence's Gate is one of the most striking architectural structures in Drogheda and an important part of the tourism infrastructure. It was utilised when Colta sent their selection panel to the town in earlier years, when the street in front of it became FLA Street, where a mini FLA was presented for a day to the adjudicators. The chairperson of the local authority told us that they used the spectacle of the street leading to the gate as part of their bid to impress upon the judges both the built heritage of the area and also the ability to pull off such an event. Music at the Gate was a particular event that was held every day during the FLA in 2018, but did not take place during the 2019 event due to difficulties complying with health and safety requirements set out by the event management company. This was very much a community exercise, and it took place prior to that also. It began as a community initiative when the Lawrence's Gate area was pedestrianised, and the photographs here actually are from events prior to the FLA, when local musicians gathered and there was some dancing, and it encouraged participation. During the FLA, it highlighted tensions between perhaps the informal local activities that were organised by local musicians and the more professionalised and formal activities that were led primarily by the local authority. It became an important space that was not linked with alcohol consumption, which leads on nicely from the previous talk, whereby an awful lot of activities in this area was centered around the consumption of alcohol. So it provided a different type of space for the performance of Irish traditional music. And finally, West Street and St. Peter's was another significant space. This street is a long, narrow street, which became a hub of the festival. The space in front of the church became an important space and was utilised for flash mobs and other broadcasts. Beyond the FLA, when the weather is fine, the steps are a space that continue to attract people to sit and relax, but there are also some issues surrounding the consumption of alcohol. Like St. Lawrence's Gate, the church provided an iconic backdrop for some of the televised footage. It's important to note, however, that a large portion of the space remains the property of the church, and there was close cooperation between the church authorities, the county council and Colta Kiltorriern to ensure the safe use of this space, with agreements on issues such as insurance. So in terms of where we're going, and to conclude, Joan Martin, the chairperson of the local authority, noted that there was a significant legacy for the town and a realisation that Drogheda can do festival. It enhanced the confidence of local communities and businesses. Drogheda had the capacity both in terms of crowds and organisational resources, and was well located to attract large crowds. The support and confidence of Fáilte Ireland, the tourism body, in the town to deliver on future projects was also important. Successful use of public spaces highlighted how these spaces could be used difficulty, such as the part or temporary pedestrianisation of West Street, and that's coming into play again in response to COVID-19. It also brought other sites into use or into public consciousness as spaces that could be utilised more. So we're looking to further critique the success of the FLA and look at different measures in terms of how it was successful through interviews and engagement with other stakeholders. And that's, I think, where I'm going to leave it in terms of presenting.
Okay, thank you very much. It was also very interesting, and I think it also generated a lot of comments and questions on the chat. The first question we have is from Bernadette Queen, who asked what kind of perception will people have had about Bolton Square before the fleet, and has the fact that it was so central to the fleet had any impact on how it has been used since, or for how people now relate to it?
So the Bolton Square, I think it was a car park, and that it was a space that was largely ignored by local people. The council had identified it as a space for use, as I said, back as far as 2013, but hadn't figured out how to use it or in what way it could be used. And I think the events company that was brought in to work on the FLA had a significant role in demonstrating how it could be used. And an important part that comes up again and again in the discussions, while we don't maybe have full insight into the budgets and that aspect of the FLA, that's somewhat carefully kept by the local authority. We do know that they were very happy to invest very significantly in a very high spec gig rig with the lighting and staging and TV screens to give a positive image of this square. They did it in 2018, it was successful. They repeated it in 2019. And I think for future events, it has been identified now as a space that can cater for this. An important aspect also was that the residents surrounding it, while they had some concerns initially, by the time the FLA came around, they turned their front gardens or their houses into part of this space by putting up bunting, by in many instances. So I had a view looking down from the stage. I could see them sitting on chairs, enjoying a few drinks or a cup of coffee, watching the activities. They became very much part of the space. So that was how it developed. But perhaps one aspect that does have to be considered going forward is there is a little bit of a slope which challenges some aspects of developing the site in terms of staging, and that has to be borne in mind.
Okay, there is a second question from Trish, who asked, have you looked at the way in which national identity, nationalism has operated through the fleet, currently or historically? And
in terms of national identity, and it is interesting to consider the ideas of inclusivity. I suppose initially this was very much, and the organization Cultus was connected with nationalism and republicanism at one stage, and would still have an underlying aspect of that. In the 70s, for example, one of the FLAs was cancelled due to the troubles in the north of Ireland. And the FLA has only once been staged in Northern Ireland, in Derry in 2013. But the FLA has become much more inclusive and has made much more efforts at moving beyond this kind of nationalistic view of Irish traditional music and trying to include a much broader identity. Irish traditional music has become a kind of a globalized, commodified, commercialized music form. And many people who engage in it have no connection to Ireland at all. In the Senior Céilí band competition, the big competition, there was 3 Japanese Céilí bands competing in the FLA in recent years who don't have an ethnic connection or any close connection to Ireland, the country, but enjoy the music. Also, while the Irish language is very much promoted, and there's a number of activities for that, amongst the events in Drogheda were Irish language classes for New Irish and for migrant groups, and introductory workshops that would introduce people from different backgrounds who may indeed be living in Drogheda, but to aspects of Irish culture. So that was an aspect of inclusivity that has been developed.
Okay, there are a couple of other questions, but I think we are going to stay here because we want to make sure that everything works with time. But thanks very much. It was very interesting and fascinating. And we are going to move to the fourth presentation of this morning from Britt Swartjes from the university, the Erasmus University of Rotterdam, who is going to do a presentation on constructing encounters, how music festivals, festival producers deal with difference.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, I think
Yeah?
we can.
Okay, good. So thank you, first of all, for organizing. I'm very happy to share some first ideas and findings for an article. So I'm working at the Erasmus University of Rotterdam and in Arts and Culture Studies. I'm part of another HERA-funded project, Festiversities, in which we're working on inclusiveness and exclusiveness, and mainly on encounters with cultural diversity in music festivals as public spaces. The paper I'm working on now, or the next couple of months, is based on interviews I've done with festival organizers in Rotterdam. And a preliminary title is Creating the Ultimate Setting, How Music Festival Organizers Produce Spaces of Encounter in an Urban Context. So the idea is that we want to see how a festival organizer perceive their festival space and how they think they can create spaces of encounter within their festival spaces. We're going to argue that they do so by programming diversity and organizing their space in such a way that audience move and cross those spatial and boundaries in taste. So we're going to mainly focus on the festival organizer's perspective and also how encounters happen between audiences and not between other festival actors. We're also mainly focusing on the festival space itself. So what happens once you have an audience within your space and how can encounters happen between groups in there. So we're not as much focusing on the outer boundaries, which we want to do in another paper, and which will focus on, for example, the location within the city or ticket pricing. In this paper, theoretically, we want to combine insights from cultural sociology and environmental psychology. Well, from cultural sociology, we know that the taste people have in music and art runs along social boundaries of, for example, class, ethnicity, race, age, gender, etc. And we think festival spaces are a perfect example to look at how these social boundaries may be crossed as different tastes often come together within one festival space. We then want to combine this with environmental psychology to see how these boundaries and tastes may be crossed through organizing the space in a way in which this can happen. For example, through visuals or through certain visual aids or etc. We think it's of importance to study the festival producer's perspective, also because something I've read once in a book by Maren Duffy, in which they argued that it's important to look at the production of a space because it's important in how audiences experience the atmosphere of a festival. This is to say that encounters don't just happen. The focus for us is on the Rotterdam area, and more specifically on 4 festivals, which we've selected based on 4 selection criteria. So we're focusing on ticket pricing, on the location within the city, on the number of musical genres, and on the maturity, so the number of editions. And the green kind of figure on the top left, you see the location of Blijdorp Festival. This is an electronic music festival, which is often described as a happy village. It has had 7 editions so far, and it has ticket pricing, so their tickets are around 40 euros each. Then the yellow square in the middle is the location of Rotterdam Unlimited. This festival has had 6 editions so far, but it has developed from 2 other festivals, Dunja and Summer Carnival, and those have had editions since the 60s. It's a free event, and its aim is to celebrate cultural diversity in the heart of the city for 5 days in the summer. Then slightly below the yellow square, you see a purple triangle, which is the location of Magia Festival. This is a free festival, a world music festival, and it has had 3 editions so far. It's partially paid, partially free. All the way down below, we have the location of Metropolis Festival. This is also a free festival, and it's was an indie rock festival, but has included more genres over the past years, for example, hip hop. It has had 32 editions so far. I would like to take you through some of my first ideas on how festival organizers think about the production of their space and what that has to do with encounters and diversity. First of all, most organizers think of diversity in the sense that they need to adjust their programming to get a diverse audience into their festival space. For example, as the festival director of Magia said, if you really want diversity, then you have to change your program accordingly. This is especially interesting because he has a world music festival, and he has argued several times that he doesn't necessarily want to change that, but that he knows that it attracts primarily a white audience. Then secondly, festival organizers still see social boundaries that have a certain physical representation within their festival space. As the festival director of Confetti Fest, for example, said, is that most organizers see their stages as separate islands. As you, for example, see in the visual I made below, of course oversimplified, is 2 stages the Confetti Fest has at their festival, which are Operator and Bird. Bird attracts, as the festival director said, a multicultural audience. He is buying in some Black music, so to speak. An Operator is more electronic music, which he tries to buy in more white audiences. Then thirdly, as we're thinking, but how then do those groups meet if you see those stages as separate islands? This is what several festival organizers have argued, is that through movement, those audience groups meet. So as you're going to be able to see on the following visual, I hope it works through Zoom. As the festival director of Rotterdam Unlimited said, audience groups keep moving when you change the programming. They mix, they get to mix, they get into contact with people instead of accumulating in one little area. So the first way in which they try to do that is to change, so to speak, the islands at which those audiences are, so that they have to move and have to see other people and other places within the festival. But they do this in a second way, which is through organizing the space in a particular way. For example, as this festival organizer said, you make sure that there's a good market, which is why people have to constantly walk to get food and drinks. If you stand at stage 1, you can already see stage 2 so that you're challenged. You design the place, you stimulate people to keep moving, but programming is primary. Then, of course, there are some side notes to be made to this. As I already said, for example, the organizer of Magia Festival doesn't want to change his program accordingly. So in that way, he doesn't get a diverse audience into the festival space at first place. But also sometimes it just doesn't work. For example, we had a case with Metropolis Festival in which they tried to change the programming to keep audiences moving, but the audiences just left after the programming changed. So in this way, that didn't work. Just to conclude, I think the main idea is that we want to look at how taste has a specific spatial dimension in festivals and how that helps in encountering diversity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's perfect on time again. I'm saying that because I'm supposed to be the master of time for this session. So there have been there are actually a lot of comments and questions. So there is a first question from David, who is asking, do the festival organizers see it as important to create inclusivity as a feature of their event, and more precisely, is that because they are progressive, or feel that there is a commercial or other benefit from doing so?
So it's for these festival organizers, there are different reasons. Of course, for Rotterdam Unlimited, for example, their goal is to celebrate cultural diversity. So it would be weird for them not to do anything with it. But also for the Rotterdam case, there is a broader organization for festivals, a municipal organization, and they very much stimulate cultural diversity. So festivals also have to take in some kind of diversity into their plans. Like they also say that there's, it's just something they have to do, such as also sustainability, but then they also say it's something we want to do, but it's also something that we just have to do in this time. Yeah.
Okay. There is another question from Anna de Jongs asking, did the festival director of Magia provide insight into how they created diversity?
Yeah, so for Magia, it's a world music festival which has primarily a white audience, but there the organizer decided to focus more on diversity for the artists. So he tries to combine different kind of music styles and genre within the program, and not focusing very much on the audiences. So it's a different type of diversity, which all of these festivals have. For example, Rotterdam Unlimited tries to focus more on cultural diversity and ethnic and racial diversity, whereas Metropolis focuses more on age and generation. So there's this difference between all these types of music festivals.
Okay, there is another question from David, but as we already have a question from David, I'm going to prioritize a question from other people. There is a question from Gail McPherson, who like question and comment. So she's saying how to create diversity is interesting. When we conducted work in Glasgow over a decade ago, the policymakers were against having specific ethnic festival, as it wasn't integrated but reinforced exclusion, and argued like this, if you want inclusivity, then you need to program it like that. So the question was, how do you create identity from this? Is it possible when you're dealing with difference? So I don't know if you have a reflection on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think for these festivals, it's not like it's diversity in the intersectional sense. They're still focusing on a particular kind of diversity. So they do have a particular festival identity, and most often also related to that particular kind of diversity, the audiences that they attract. So as I also said, for Rotterdam Unlimited, it's cultural and ethnic diversity that they want to celebrate. But for Metropolis, it's generational diversity. So I think in that sense, the diversity kind of becomes the identity of the festival.
And there is a question from Chloe Stidman, who asks, how do they engineer, so she's referring to the island you were talking about, and she asked, how do they engineer each island to attract different groups of people and influence behavior and emotions, mainly via music choices or other ambient and sensory elements such as color, smell, architecture, seating types, etc.?
Yeah. So engineering all those islands, it's based on the music that will happen at that particular stage. But it's also has to do with, for example, architecture. I remember an organizer telling me that he wanted to create these kind of fences, but also have something above people's heads and use certain visuals that fit with that kind of music genre. So they do engineer those spaces, but also those spaces have financial restrictions. So it's mainly music, but often they can't focus on all those sensory elements because there's just no money to do it all.
Okay, we are going to stop here to move on to the next presentation. Thanks very much, Britt. It was also very interesting to see like how things go with our like fellow Festivacity project. And we are going to move to the last presentation of this first session from Eleni Kumpuzi, Katarzyna Kosmala, and Gareth Rice from my own university, which is the University of the West of Scotland. And they are going to do a presentation called Messing About in Boats, Integration in the City through Glasgow's Canal and Clydebank Festivals.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. You can see the screen. Is that okay?
Yes, I
okay.
think so.
So thank you for having us here today. My name is Elena Kumpuzi. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of the West of Scotland, and my co-authors are Professor Katarzyna Kosmala. I think Katarzyna is here. I know she's here, and Dr. Gareth Rice. I'm not sure if Gareth managed to come. We're all from the University of the West of Scotland, and this paper is I'm presenting today is based on a larger project, my PhD, which is a study of the engagement of transient and marginalized communities with the post-industrial urban and inland waterways, the waterscape, and specifically with the Forth and Clyde Canal and the River Clyde in Glasgow, Scotland. In a study of it is a study of the visible and invisible barriers that urban renewal and placemaking processes pose that could block participation and use of the waterways. For this paper, we draw from specific aspects of empirical data from the River Clyde and the canal. Before I began the PhD, I was museum officer at the Tall Ship in Glasgow, which is a museum ship at the riverside of Glasgow. And during my work there, as a legacy to a 3-year collaboration to a boat building project, we started Clydebank Festival. So I have an inside knowledge of the event from its very beginning, and also this is my positionality to the whole research. I was actually participating as I was observing in the research. During the case study of the PhD project, the community groups, we worked with built 3 boats with their oars, and they participated in the 2 festivals, Clydebank and the Glasgow Canal Festival, where we drew the insights I'm presenting here today. And these are 2 small festivals, relatively small festivals. They're free, and they are community-based. So they address the local communities. The main argument in this paper is that in order for transient communities who experience the post-industrial waterscape to acquire a sense of place and integration, which leads to meaningful engagement, the waterscapes should be viewed as a livescape. And by livescape, we mean the live environment, such as the river or the canal, which consists of active elements like the water, and actions such as boating. By livescape, we also mean the non-static environment, which is always in a changing state, like the communities living and working near the canal and the river, which are in a constant state of becoming. And we adapt here concepts analyzed by Ingold and Lorimer of the acted and worked places. For example, Ingold's Taskscape. So, for example, for Clyde is famous for its shipbuilding history, but the nearby communities before the shipbuilding came in, they were weavers' communities. So, and now they again changed. So they're always changing. By being fluid and not static, the livescape challenges anthropocentric knowledge and hegemonic approaches to placemaking. We adopt here Neymanis' concept of unknowability of the watery environment, in this case of the post-industrial waterscapes, and we argue that in the livescape, knowability is contested, and so is hegemonic discourse of how these places should be used. And furthermore, we agree with Jane Bennett's emphasis of the vitality of the non-human matter in the life realm, and also with Susan Hall's study of Walworth Road in London, another lifescape for us, and the everyday interactions of objects, places, and people. And in this paper, we derive our insights from the exchanges of transient community groups with the boats and the watery environments of the two festivals. Also by transient communities, we mean people who have been affected by mobilization and displacement, such as migration, but also people whose environment is in a transient state, affected by changes due to urban regeneration. Transient communities in this study are affected by marginalization from the placemaking process that occurs in the areas adjacent to the areas we're looking at, the river and the canal. The participants in the two festivals interacted with the public and visitors by taking them on the water with the boats. Visitors had the opportunity to hear directly from the participants about the boat building experience and and then themselves could experience being on the water. Language barriers were overcome through the use of the boats. This experience gave the participants entry as exhibitors to both festivals, events which they would not have been likely to attend. As their groups are marginalized in these cultural activities, and this also brought others involved in the event into direct dialogue with these groups. This was achieved by the participants engaging in an activity, the boat building, but also the boating. They learned how to row the boats and how to be on the water, so then they could help visitors to do the same thing, to be in the boat with them. That overcame initial cultural and social barriers and built confidence, pride, and a shared language. The empirical work in the two festivals have provided evidence that cultural events enable transient communities to interact and integrate through practice and participation by activating the lifescape. The participating groups did that by bringing the boats they built in the canal and the river and encouraged others to use them too. Being on a boat, and here we see in one of the pictures, one of the visitors who is on the boat. They didn't know how to swim, but they managed to have a go at rowing the boat. They became quite familiar. So the participating groups did that by bringing the boats they built in the canal and the river and encourage others to use them too. Being on a boat is a skill that requires knowledge of the watery environment and the possibilities and limitations of the boat itself. And when this skill is communicated with others, generates relationships through interactions and opens up opportunities for belonging and agency through integration. And finally, we argue that if we view the post-industrial landscape as a place, as an unidentifiable place, then there is a danger that it reinforces hegemonic values in assessing the usefulness or otherwise of the place, and potentially excludes marginalized and transient perspectives. Whereas if we view it as a lifescape, where our observations show that access to water is viewed as a social environment, as a social space, shared space, then the landscape's materiality and nobility is loosened. The place is in a perpetual making process, leaving the space to the values of use, removing barriers in interactions and allowing integration to occur. So that's me. I hope it wasn't.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh wow. Can everybody hear me okay? I heard some echo in my voice for some reason. Okay, no, okay, it worked. So anyway, so yeah, thanks very much for this. We have for the moment one question from David, who is asking how important was it that the transient group contributed to the production process in the lead up to the festival itself, ameliorating the problems associated with one of spectacular events? Question mark. So,
it was very important. The marginalized groups contributed. They were very different events. They're not very different. Both events try to be small and address to the local communities that they live around the areas. One in the canal and the other at the riverside. But the Kleibil Festival particularly encourages people to be on the water. Whereas the Canal Festival also do that, but because the Kleibil Festival was based on a boat building project with marginalized communities, so that was at the very beginning of the Kleibil Festival, the marginalized communities being involved in boat building and using boats, it was at the very heart of the Kleibil Festival. So there is more emphasis there. What's the, and of course with, I don't know if people are aware, Kleibil Festival also was a collaboration with Galgale, which is a group with that serves marginalized communities. So the Kleibil Festival is very much about marginalized communities being there. But with the Canal Festival, what we observed is that direct participants, grassroots participants, were not in the festival. They were organizations that represented them with stalls, but the participants, we were the only group there that had the actual marginalized community participants there at the taking part. So we think it was very important because then visitors got the real understanding of and meeting the people who who represented those communities, and then the dialogue opened and the interactions occurred. So yes, it was very important.
Thanks. Are there any other questions for? Oh yeah, there is another question from David, which is there a tension in the Canal Festival in North Glasgow around this integration agenda and the improvement of the Spiers Wharf area, which, like earlier discussion, appears to be about gentrification?
So in which area? Is it both areas or? Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
So is there a tension in the Canal Festival? So in North Glasgow around the integration agenda and the improvement. So he's talking about the Spiers Wharf area,
yeah.
Which appears to be about gentrification.
Yes, and it's very much that, and that affects the festival directly. What happened was for 2019, the festival producers have asked direct involvement of the communities, local communities, in the organization of the festivals. It was a very interesting call, and we responded. Because of the language barriers, because at that particular Canal Festival, we only had the refugee communities participating. The other boat wasn't built yet. And we, from the refugee organization, we decided that I'm going to go with one of the officers to represent the group because of the language barriers. And it was very, very interesting because then most of the representatives were from the local community, but it was clear that it was a gentrified bunch of people, very, very much gentrified area. So, and also it's an area where our participants, there was absolutely no way it would have been before, because it has been gentrified, is out of reach really. It's not that people cannot visit there or they cannot use it every day, but it doesn't encourage, there is nothing there. There are no affordable cafes for people to hang around. So it's a bit of exclusive space.